To order. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We gather here this morning not simply to examine the President's budget request, but to begin to lay out a vision for the future of NASA and human exploration. As we begin the process of putting together a roadmap for the future of NASA, there's one vital question that this committee should examine. Should NASA focus primarily inwards or outwards beyond lower Earth orbit? Since the end of the last administration, we have seen a disproportionate increase in the amount of federal funds that have been allocated to the Earth Science Program at the expense of and in comparison to exploration and space operations, planetary science, heliophysics, and astrophysics, which I believe are all rooted in exploration and should be central to the core mission of NASA. As I observed at our last hearing, the first priority for the space component of this subcommittee is to work to refocus NASA's energies on its core priority of exploring space. I know that is a passion of the professionals at this fine institution. I see good signs that the current goals set out for human exploration are being achieved, as witnessed in December with the incredibly successful launch of the Orion EFT-1, and yesterday at Orbital's solid rocker motor test in Utah, the engine that will power the Space Launch System into deep space. But we need to use that momentum and get back to the hard sciences, to manned space exploration, and to the innovation that has been integral to the mission of NASA. We also need to provide the men and women that work at NASA with a clear and consistent long-term mission objectives, so that they do not find themselves continually pouring time and energy into projects only to see them swept up and carried away by the ever-changing winds of politics. Science needs to drive NASA's mission, rather than the political winds of Washington. Short-changing these projects will surely have an adverse impact on encouraging our nation's best and brightest to continue to want to work with NASA. As the chairman of this subcommittee, I'm looking forward to being an outspoken champion not only for NASA and not only for the Johnson Space Center, but for everyone within the NASA family who plays a key role in advancing human exploration and promoting the hard sciences. As former NASA astronaut Dr. Mike Massimino mentioned at our last hearing, young Americans are interested in space-related STEM careers and see themselves as future space entrepreneurs. It's critical that we begin to refocus the core priorities of NASA so that greater and exciting new opportunities can emerge and be realized. It is time for man once again to leave the safety of the harbor and to further explore the deep, uncharted waters of deep space. Now recognize the ranking member, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's wonderful to serve with you on this committee, and I look forward to working with you in the years ahead. You know, this month we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA. Congress created NACA in 1915 because even though the Wright brothers had invented power flight in the U.S. in 1903, by the beginning of World War I, the U.S. lagged behind Europe in aviation technology. Within decades of NACA's creation, the U.S. was leading the world in aviation once again. We put the P-51 Mustang in the sky, a fighter that proved so critical to the success of the Allies against Hitler. And later, in 1947, we were the envy of the world when Chuck Yeager's X-1 rocket plane broke the sound barrier. But when the Soviet Union placed the first artificial satellite in orbit around the Earth, the U.S. was once again behind. Congress responded this time by folding the efforts of NACA into the newly established National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, in 1958. By 1969, NASA put astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. And in the decades following, NASA sent probes to explore the worlds of our solar system, built telescopes in space to peer to the edges of the universe, built a research outpost in space permanently tended by a crew of international astronauts, and made it possible to study the planet that we call home from space. Over the past century, the investments we have made in our civil aeronautics and space programs look pretty modest compared to the returns. Safe and reliable commercial air transportation, communication satellites, space-based imagery, and spin-off technologies from human spaceflight have provided our country extraordinary economic benefits. The Apollo and Space Shuttle programs inspired generations of American students to pursue education in math, science, and engineering, many of whom went on to lead a revolution in computing and information technology. Just a few years back, I visited a high school in my home state of Michigan, and I witnessed firsthand NASA's continued ability to inspire. All of the students were gathered in the gym to watch a large projector screen that connected them directly to U.S. astronauts on the International Space Station. And when the astronauts asked if any of the students planned to pursue degrees in the STEM fields, hundreds of hands shot up across the auditorium. Today, it is simply impossible to imagine the world devoid of scientific understanding that NASA has enabled us to achieve. Because of NASA, we know our planet is a fragile oasis in an unimaginably vast space. We know every point in the universe is speeding away from us at an accelerating pace, driven by some unforeseen force called dark energy. We know our galaxy is filled with billions and billions of planets, many of them possibly very much like our Earth. And we have seen actions and evidence of black holes whose mind-bending physics remind us of how much we have to learn about the fundamental nature of space and time. I see NASA's budget as a strategic portfolio of investments aimed at improving the well-being of our country and of our civilization. Like any portfolio, we must carefully choose our investments and remember that the balance of the overall portfolio is of the utmost importance. We must avoid false choices between robotic exploration, human exploration, the study of the universe, or the study of our home planet. We must avoid the temptation to view NASA's mission as a set of competing priorities. Rather, we should seek a set of complementary initiatives that will pay returns to our civilization for centuries to come. I want to thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your service to our country and your appearance before the subcommittee today. And I want to thank you, Chairman Cruz, for holding this hearing, and for Ranking Member Nelson for everything you have done and continue to do for our space program and for the example that you set for this committee. Although my position on this committee is new, my passion for science and technology is not. And I am truly excited about my opportunity to serve as ranking member for the subcommittee, and I look forward to our discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would offer the ranking member of the full committee, Senator Nelson, an opportunity to give a statement as well.
Well, you're very gracious, Mr. Chairman, and I want to compliment you. At the last hearing, I said even though the temperature outside was 10 degrees, that blossoms were breaking out all over Washington by virtue of the very supportive statements that you had made about NASA, of which you have continued those very supportive statements. And I want you to know how much the NASA community and NASA family is appreciative of that support. I want to point out that in some quarters it seems to be fashionable to say that earth science is not a part of the exploration program, and yet I would point out that tonight there is the launch of a mission called MMS. It has to do with the magnetosphere, and it will be a mission to gauge space weather, in other words, nuclear explosions from the surface of the sun, and how that affects our life here on Earth. GPS, various other satellites. And so earth science directly relates to everything that we're doing in exploration. And I would draw that distinction for folks who think that it's not fashionable that NASA be a part of earth science. The other thing that I want to compliment the ranking member, to see someone so enthusiastic as Senator Peters is indeed extremely gratifying. And furthermore, I would like to congratulate the administrator. He is now going on 7 years. His hair was dark when he started. The fact that he's been able to get everybody in the harness over there at NASA, now without a deputy, although the nominee for deputy is sitting in the front row, and he's got everybody in the harness pulling in the right direction, all in the same direction, which is a significant accomplishment for the administrator. So I just wanted to pass around those compliments to you, to Senator Peters, and to the administrator. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Senator Nelson, and it's been a pleasure the last 2 years serving on this committee was with you as the chairman of the subcommittee, and I'm looking forward to the next 2 years continuing to serve with you and with the new ranking member, Senator Peters. We have a lot of work to do, and we are blessed to have a subcommittee with some talented and dedicated members on both sides of the aisle who are committed to the core mission of NASA. With that, I'm very pleased to represent to introduce and welcome the distinguished Administrator of NASA, the Honorable Charles Bolden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Peters, I want to, first of all, on behalf of the entire NASA family, congratulate the two of you on your positions. I look forward to working with you. It was interesting sitting here listening to everyone speak, because I really appreciate the work that this committee has done through the years. It was here that the 2010 Authorization Act was crafted, and that is the present roadmap on which we work. So I commend the committee and look forward to continuing to work with you all. The President's proposing a fiscal year 2016 budget of $18.5 billion for us that builds on the 2015 appropriation and the significant investments that the administration and the Congress have made in America's space program over the past 6 years. Thanks to the hard work of our NASA team and partners all across America, we've made a lot of progress on our journey to Mars. In fact, we have now progressed farther on this path to sending humans to Mars than at any point in NASA's history. And this budget will keep us marching forward. The support of this subcommittee and the Congress are essential to this journey. The International Space Station is the critical first step in this work. It's our springboard to the rest of the solar system, and we're committed to extending space station operations to at least 2024. Thanks to the grit, determination, and American ingenuity, we have returned ISS cargo resupply missions to the United States, insourcing these jobs and creating a new private market in low Earth orbit. Under a plan outlined by the administration early in its term, we also have awarded 2 American companies, SpaceX and Boeing, fixed-price contracts to safely and cost-effectively transport our astronauts to the space station from U.S. soil. This will end our sole reliance on Russia. It's critical that we receive the funding requested for the 2016 budget so that we can meet our 2017 target date and stop writing checks to the Russian Space Agency. Our newest, most powerful rocket ever developed, the Space Launch System, or SLS, has moved from formulation to development, something no other exploration-class vehicle has achieved since the agency built the Space Shuttle. The Orion spacecraft performed flawlessly on its first trip to space this past December. The SLS and Exploration Ground Systems are on track for launch capability readiness by November of 2018, and the teams are hard at work on completing technical and design reviews for Orion. Our budget also funds a robust science program with dozens of operating missions studying our solar system and the universe. New Horizons is preparing for its arrival at Pluto in July, and Dawn is now in orbit around the dwarf planet Ceres. Before we send humans to Mars, robots are paving the way. We're at work on a Mars rover for 2020 and have begun planning a mission to explore Jupiter's fascinating moon, Europa. NASA is a leader in Earth science, and our constantly expanding view of our planet from space is helping us better understand and prepare for these changes. NASA has 21 research missions studying Earth, and the last year alone, we launched an unprecedented 5 more. We also are at work on humanity's first voyage to our home star, a mission that will repeatedly pass through the sun's outer atmosphere that Senator Nelson mentioned a little bit earlier, that will launch tonight. NASA's Hubble, Chandra, and Kepler space telescopes explore the universe beyond our solar system. Hubble's successor, the James Webb Space Telescope, is taking shape right now out in Maryland, and a new mission is in development to extend Kepler's pioneering work in finding planets. Technology drives science, exploration, and our journey deeper into the solar system and to Mars. With the President's request, NASA will continue to maintain a steady pipeline of technology to ensure that we continue to lead the world in space exploration and scientific discovery. NASA is also with you when you fly, and we're committed to transforming aviation by dramatically reducing its environmental impact, maintaining safety in more crowded skies, and paving the way toward revolutionary aircraft shapes and propulsion systems. Mr. Chairman, America's space program is not just alive, it's thriving. The strong support we receive from this subcommittee and the entire Congress is making that happen, and I particularly appreciate the generous fiscal 2015 appropriation. As the President said in his State of the Union address, and I quote, "We're pushing out into the solar system not just to visit, but to stay, part of a re-energized space program that will send American astronauts to Mars," unquote. NASA looks forward to working with the Congress to make this vision a reality. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you and the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Administrator Bolden. Thank you for joining us here this morning, and thank you for your many, many years of honorable service to our nation. I'd like to start by asking a general question. In your judgment, what is the core mission of NASA?
Mr. Chairman, I've given that a lot of thought over the last few days, and so I went back and looked at the original Space Act of 1958, and I won't quote it, but essentially our core mission from the very beginning has been to investigate, explore space and the Earth environment, and to help us make this place a better place. So that's the nuts of it right there. So, and I have to admit, another core part of it, because we have multiple, if you want to say multiple cores, which is kind of hard, aeronautics is an essential part of what NASA does. It is the big A in NASA, and if someone from another planet came down and looked at our budget, they probably would not believe that, because it is the least funded, the skimpiest funded portion of the budget, but we're working on it.
Well, there's no doubt that there are multiple important priorities within NASA, but I would suggest that almost any American would agree that the core function of NASA is to explore space. That's what inspires little boys and little girls across this country. It's what sets NASA apart from any other agency, as the mission that has landed man on the moon, that has the potential to explore new worlds beyond our imagination. And you and I have had this conversation many times. And you know that I am concerned that NASA, in the current environment, has lost its full focus on that core mission. And I want to talk for a minute about the current budget. And if you look at the current budget of NASA, and if you compare 2009 to 2016, we can see from 2009 to 2016 that Earth Sciences has had a 41% increase in the budget. In contrast, exploration and space operations, what I would consider the core function of NASA, has seen its budget drop 7.6%. And looking at the remainder of the elements, planetary sciences has a 3% increase, heliophysics a 10% increase, astrophysics a 10% increase. In my judgment, this does not represent a fair or appropriate allocation of resources, that it is shifting resources away from the core functions of NASA to other functions. Do you share that assessment?
Mr. Chairman, I'm very interested in your chart. However, I will say one thing. It is interesting to note that there is a decrease in exploration or human spaceflight when, in fact, that was somewhat intentional because we were trying to get the cost of exploration down as we reach farther out into the solar system. It used to cost us $2 billion a year to maintain the space shuttle, whether we flew it or not. Today, NASA pays, I want to say we now have 2 contracts that are in the neighborhood of about $6.6 billion that will give us 16 flights on a combination of Boeing and SpaceX missions carrying American astronauts to space. That will probably take place over about maybe 3 or 4 years. So I think we have that decrease is actually a little bit of what we were trying to do, get the cost of flying humans into space down. That's what's driving the market, is reducing launch costs. So the fact that Earth science has increased, I'm proud to say, it has enabled us to understand our planet far better than we ever did before, because it's absolutely critical. If I go back to what used to be my home state and is your state, the state of Texas, we have the Texas Soil Observation Network, which is strongly supported by NASA. And Senator, I don't need to tell you, when I lived in Houston, the elevation sank a matter of inches over the period of time that I lived there. And that was because we were pumping water out of the ground and we just didn't realize what was going on. But now, because of some of NASA's efforts, we have satellites that are able to look and actually measure the difference in gravitational field of Earth, and we can tell that we're emptying out the aquifers. And that's just looking at our environment, trying to make sure that we have a better place for all of us in which to live, and I think that's critical.
I'm confident, though, that it's not your testimony to the subcommittee that NASA has all the resources it needs for space exploration.
No.
And that it has suddenly gotten less expensive and more affordable. Indeed, as you know, the first hearing the subcommittee had, we heard from expert testimony as to the real challenges if we are going to go back to the moon or to Mars or beyond, that it's going to require a significant investment. And I would suggest that this chart does not suggest that the investment of budgetary resources is going where it should. And let me note one specific matter, which is this past December, Orion completed a nearly flawless maiden unmanned test flight on the Exploration Flight Test 1 mission. But despite the success of SLS and Orion, the President's budget request cuts funding by over $441 million. Does the administration lack confidence in SLS and Orion and their ability to get American astronauts to Mars in the 2021 timeframe?
Senator, quite the contrary. I think the administration has the utmost confidence in us, and that's the reason that they presented the bill for $18.5 billion that they did to the Congress. The President trusts me to take whatever amount of funds the Congress appropriates to us and appropriately balance that across our portfolio, because we do have multiple things for which we are responsible. The fact that we now have a set date where the launch complex at the Kennedy Space Center and SLS will be ready for flight of November 2018. The fact that we're going to have a set date when Orion will be ready to be integrated with SLS, and we'll have that this summer. The fact that we had a successful test on the solid rocket booster out at Promontory Point, Utah 2 days ago. The fact that we now have 2 contractors who are upgrading their facilities at the Kennedy Space Center and at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station so that we can launch American astronauts to space from American soil in 2017, the fact that we now have a robust competition for American companies to get cargo to space where that used to be the job of the government. I think that speaks highly to the confidence that the administration and hopefully this Congress has in our ability to do exactly what you want us to do. I don't think we have, I would say, you asked me about your chart. There's a lot of chartsmanship. I'm not sure what you include in exploration, for example. So by my statements, I was not acknowledging that I agree with the numbers on the chart. So I don't want anyone to say I accept the numbers on the chart, because when you talk about exploration, a lot of times people don't count the launch complex. You can't go anywhere if you don't have a place from which to launch. A lot of times people don't count commercial crew and cargo. We can't go anywhere if we don't have a robust, sustainable low Earth orbit infrastructure. So there are a lot of things that people don't count. We can't go anywhere if the Kennedy Space Center goes underwater and we don't know it. And that's understanding our environment. So as Senator Nelson said, it is absolutely critical that we understand Earth's environment, because this is the only place that we have to live. Having had an opportunity to view it from a place where I look around, I'm not sure anybody else in here has had that opportunity. We've got to take care of it. And the only way we can take care of it is that we know what's happening. And the only way we know what's happening is to use instruments that we develop in NASA. And we do it better than anybody else. I'm proud to say that. I always come and brag on my workforce. We do it better than anybody else in the world. And that allows us to get data to you and members of the Congress and the administration who make decisions. We don't make decisions. We don't give you opinions. We give you data. And so I'm very proud of what we've done, and I'll go back and take it for the record to see whether we agree with the numbers on the chart, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Now recognize Senator Nelson for his question.
Well, I'm going to defer to the ranking member of the subcommittee, but let me just point out, budgets are not always as clear as what we think they are, whereas it does show, as you stated, the President's request from what is existing appropriations, which, by the way, is guided by Senator Shelby and Senator Mikulski, a significant plus up in commercial crew, which we clearly have an interest, we, the United States, in being able to put Americans on American rockets and not pay the Russians to get to and from the International Space Station. But where it looks like that there is, as you said, about a $400 million reduction in the President's request for Orion and the Space Launch System, look at the other things that go along with that. Exploration ground systems, up $59 million in the President's request. Exploration R&D, up $93 million in the President's request. And then when you get to something that nobody understands, including this senator, but it also includes part of the exploration, cross-agency support. That's up $84 million. Space technology, which is all a part of the exploration program, but it's a different line item, that's up in the President's request, $129 million. So I think just those numbers, just looking at the specific isolated SLS and Orion, doesn't tell us the whole story. And I would defer to the ranking member.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Nelson. And I want to just follow along with some of the thoughts that both of the individuals have brought up. And Chairman Cruz, looking at this chart, Administrator Bolden, but I think it's also important to note that if you look at a longer time frame, looking back to the through the Bush administration, and then prior to that, the Clinton administration. It's my understanding that the money that was spent on earth sciences was considerably higher during the Clinton administration than is currently being spent during the Obama administration. So it is not as if there's been a big increase from a baseline. It's actually coming back from a major reduction that occurred during the Bush administration. And I'd like to therefore enter into the record actually a report that we have from the National Academy of Sciences, their Earth Science and Applications from Space, a midterm assessment that was done back in 2012. And if I may quote something from the report, if I may enter this without objection.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quote from it is that it noted that the Bush-era reductions in earth science funding were having a, quote, disastrous consequence on Earth observation record. So it seems as if we were trying to correct what the National Academy of Sciences, and I know the chairman has mentioned that he wants science to drive our process here, which makes sense to have it, but here we have the foremost experts in science in our country saying that the cuts that we saw in earth sciences were disastrous in the Bush era. And so I would assume that you are taking a look at those types of reports from our experts and are addressing that. So how does this year's requested increase in earth science funding address the priorities that you see coming from the scientific community?
Senator Peters, I think you know very well, we are guided, particularly in the science arena, by the input of the experts, dominantly by what we call decadal surveys, and they are studies by learned people in specific areas that come from the National Research Council, and they establish, they give us guidance. It's not mandatory, but they give us guidance on how we should put our emphasis. And so if you look at all of our programs, whether it's in heliophysics, planetary science, earth science, aeronautics, or the others, we're generally trying to do what the experts say NASA should be putting its focus on in order to get us back. And you're absolutely right. Across the board, we're really trying to get the science community back up to the levels of spending of prior years. And that can't all be done at one time. And so we take what seems to be the most important things told us by the scientific community, put our focus on that, and also we try to look at things that are going to contribute. Ultimately, going back to Senator Cruz's comment, everything that we do, if there is a choice to be made, we try to put our focus on what is going to enable us to get humans to Mars. And as I said before, when you look at science, areas like heliophysics, areas like planetary science, areas like earth science are all critical in providing data that helps us to speed our way to Mars. You know, we're looking at radiation, we're looking at the sun because it determines the time of year or the time when you want to launch a human on a mission that's going to take 8 months. So it's important for us to look at all that. And it's unfortunate that people tend to want to talk about one versus the other. We're at a time in the agency when we work in more synergistically across our mission directorates. Science helps exploration. Exploration helps science. Technology development is absolutely critical because the most important risk that I have to draw down are risks that deal with technology that we don't have today. And that's why we ask for the increased funding for technology development that we've not been able to get. So it is absolutely critical that the committees and the Congress trust NASA and some pretty smart people. You ask us to be your experts, and I consider myself to be the Congress's subject matter expert when it comes to exploration science and aeronautics. And you know, if I'm not doing that well, you ought to fire me, to be quite honest.
Well, it's clear from your answer, I mean, that how science is driving us, including observations of the Earth and the practical applications. I think we're going to talk about later, hopefully we'll have time to talk about certainly the spillovers of the work of NASA in economic development and small business, but other areas of making sure we're studying our planet have very strong economic consequences, particularly, for example, in agriculture. And I know NASA funds the Global Observatory for Ecosystem Services that's used extensively by a university in my state, Michigan State University, the first land-grant university in the country, a leader in agricultural sciences. and they collect data from Landsat satellites and distribute those to scientists, educators, and users around the world, and have significant applications when it comes to the agricultural community in this country that relies on that kind of information to plan and to do things related to increasing agricultural production. Are there other areas like that that you see are incredibly important in terms of just our day-to-day commercial activities here on our planet?
Yes, sir, there are. We just recently completed a conference meeting with policymakers and others in the states of California and Nevada about water resources, and letting them know what our earth science assets were available to help them understand how to utilize the limited water that's available, to give them hints about drought and flood cycles. I mentioned to Senator Cruz the Texas Soil Observation Network. Texas is a big state, and Texas has probably the fewest organic ways to measure things like soil moisture, and due to the fact that we launched the Soil Moisture Active Passive mission just recently, something we call SMAP, we now are able to measure very accurately soil moisture in every state of the union and around the globe, and that is becoming essential data to the people in Texas in their water resources management. And whether you're talking about farmers or ranchers, you know, you want to maximize crop yield, so we need to be able to tell them how to get more efficiently and effectively water into their particular areas. And so those are the kinds of things that I would hope people would not overlook when you talk about what we do in earth science. It's really about making life better for people on this planet.
Another question for you, if I may. Since the end of the shuttle program in 2011, the United States has relied on the Russian Soyuz for crew transportation to the International Space Station. The Soyuz cost per seat, from my understanding, has risen from $25 million per seat in 2010 to now to be more than $76 million for us to take a ride on the Soyuz up to the space station. NASA will have paid Russia over $2.1 billion by the time domestic providers Boeing and SpaceX are able to launch their astronauts in 2017. If you could elaborate for us, please, on how would failing to fully fund the $1.2 billion request for commercial crew program affect the space station program, and more specifically, our continued dependence on the Russians?
Senator, because we're now operating on two firm fixed-price contracts with Boeing and SpaceX, any amount short of the $1.2 billion that we requested will mean we will have to reduce the milestones that the two manufacturers accomplish. We can't pick one over the other. We're contractually obligated to both, so it will mean that both will be slowed down and we won't make 2017. That will mean that we'll have to go back and rely on the Russians continually to provide transportation for our crews, and so, you know, that puts us in jeopardy of not being able to. It puts us at risk, as came out in my hearing with the House Appropriations Committee, when we have to depend on someone else to get our crews to the International Space Station. We have a great relationship. I'm not worried, but I would feel much better if I knew that I was dependent on two American companies.
Well, I think we would all agree with you, Administrator. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much. Senator Gardner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your time and testimony today. It's been an interesting conversation, but I do think it merits kind of focusing back in on what we believe NASA's core mission to really be. Now, you mentioned that NASA's core mission going back to the 1950s, looking at the organic legislation to create the legislation. I kind of want to go there. We've talked about water management in California. We've talked about the Texas soil management system. I'm sorry, Chairman, I'm not as familiar with the Texas soil management, perhaps as I should be. But I want to just ask a couple of questions. Is there any other agency or department in the federal government who is sending rovers to Mars? There's not.
No, sir.
Are there any other?
There is no other nation that has a rover.
Are there any other agencies that are looking at the soil in Texas?
I would hope so, but
Are there any other agencies
we
that are
collaborate
tasked with
with
sending, any other agencies that are tasked with sending Orion, the Orion, which you said performed flawlessly?
Sir, I get your drift, but I
Well,
don't.
drift is a good point, because that's exactly what I want to talk about.
But
Because
Senator,
it seems to me that NASA perhaps has drifted away from its core mission, and I'm concerned about that. We have so many other agencies and departments that are looking at our soil sciences and our water management. And I understand the importance of going to space and putting a satellite and looking down and measuring and monitoring what we can do. But I am concerned that when we talk about how we're going to have a future of robots on Mars, that we're not funding the Opportunity rover on Mars in the 2016 budget. So I just want to ask a few questions. In 2010, President Obama went to the John F. Kennedy Space Center, and he committed to a manned mission to Mars, correct?
yes, sir.
On December 5th, 2014, Orion launched atop a ULA Delta IV Heavy rocket, the Orion 4 flight test, and you said it, I think I wrote it down because I think we tweeted it already. Orion performed flawlessly.
And some people say near flawless.
Near flawless. Okay, well, I'll take the flawless.
I take the flawless.
A two-orbit, 4-hour flight that tested many of the systems most critical to safety, evaluated launch, high-speed re-entry systems, avionics, altitude control, you name it. It was a success. You called it flawless. Would you consider Orion and SLS instrumental in achieving a manned mission to Mars?
They're absolutely essential, Senator, and I would also say, again, sort of as I talked to Senator Cruz about being careful when you you draw something out and talk about that one thing singularly. There is, to my knowledge, and I will have to take this for the record, but to my knowledge, there is only one agency of the federal government that develops the instruments, launches the satellites, and the like that explore our planet to the extent that we do, and that's NASA. So if we did not do it, many of the satellites that NOAA operates, once we get them in orbit and hand them off to them, they become NOAA satellites, not NASA satellites. But because we have the expertise at places like the Jet Propulsion Lab, Goddard Space Flight Center, and our contractors, when you talk about sensors, this is a very, I mean, there are not a lot of people in the world who do the stuff that our people do when you talk about sensors. And so if we stop doing it, it doesn't mean, that's why I think it's core. Because if you take NASA out of, if you take earth science out of NASA, the nation loses its dominant capability to do the types of earth science sensors that this nation, the types of earth science investigations that this nation does. So I just caution that if we're going to talk about core things and things that only NASA does, you really do need to look at Landsat. NASA does not own Landsat. Landsat, it belongs to the Department of the Interior. But if it were not for NASA producing the Landsat satellite because of the expertise that we have in developing the instruments, there would be no Landsat. That's a 40-year continuous program. If you took that away from NASA, we would not have it. The nation would not have it. Right now, the Department of Defense is really hurting for weather satellites. NOAA was really hurting for weather satellites a few years ago when we put together, when we were putting together a program that was ultimately canceled called INPOSE, that was going to be joint NASA, NOAA, DOD weather satellite. It was finally canceled because cost had gotten out of hand. We just weren't getting anywhere close. NASA, because we are always looking at newer, more state-of-the-art sensors, we had developed sensors that we put on a satellite that was called INPOSE Preparatory Project, NPP. NPP is now a major weather satellite for NOAA and the National Weather Service. That was not supposed to be a weather satellite. If NASA had not done that, this nation would not be able, this nation and other people around the world would not be able to do things that they do about understanding the climate, predicting hurricanes and tornadoes, which we can't predict. But I just caution people about saying, okay, NASA shouldn't be doing this. We are the core producers of instruments and satellites that look at this planet. We're better than anybody else in the world, and if you took that out of NASA, you've got to put it somewhere. And there are other agencies that do not have that. We are known for our program management capability. That's why everybody comes to us to get satellites. I think if you talk to Dr. Sullivan over at NOAA, if you talk to you know, any of the secretaries about, okay, where do I want to go to get a good satellite? Hopefully they would tell you they'd come to us.
Well, given the comments that you made about President Obama's commitment to the manned mission to Mars, given your comments about the Orion SLS being instrumental in the manned Mars mission, I still don't understand why we have seen a reduction then in the Orion program from 15 to 16, the SLS program from 15 to 16. And make no doubt about it that I support science and research funding, but I also support identifying priorities and funding priorities. And so I'm very concerned that this budget document, the document that Senator Cruz put forward in a chart, Chairman Cruz put forward in a chart, what NASA's priorities, where they're at, and really if we're seeing the kind of drift that is going to make our mission, the core mission that I believe it should be, difficult to reach. The budget request for Earth Science, put a little numbers to this 41% increase, for FY16 is $1.95 billion. A lot of systems monitoring Earth, multiple agencies supporting Earth sciences, but we are without the basic required system to send pioneers to Mars. So 41% increase, but yet NASA, the only agency, the only part of our government that is working on sending people out there, doesn't have the basic capacity to do that while we're decreasing and increasing Earth sciences. So I know I'm running out of time, but I'm concerned that with the small amount of money that we've allocated to our mission that's been endorsed by the President. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield it back to you.
Senator, may I make a comment? Because again, I want to make a slight correction. You are absolutely correct that we don't have everything that we need to get humans to Mars. That is not in human exploration. That is in space technology. This agency and this president has been we requested $1 billion when I became the NASA administrator to establish a space technology mission directorate, because the things that we're missing in being able to safely and effectively send humans to Mars, the majority of that is not done in the human exploration mission directorate. I need it to be done in Space Technology Mission Directorate, and that's not funded efficiently.
So why not fund the Mars Opportunity Rover in the 2016 budget?
Mars Opportunity Rover, Senator, we are getting incredible data from Mars through Curiosity, through Opportunity. We're getting ready to send InSight. We cannot continue to operate instruments and missions whose time has passed, because I won't be able to put something like InSight on Mars in 2016 that for the first time ever is going to core deeper into the surface of the planet. I don't have a rover that can do that today. I have to make choices. This is hopefully you trust me, Senator. My choice since becoming the NASA administrator was to put $49 billion on human spaceflight and $11 billion on Earth science. So that's $498 million, I'm sorry, thank you. $498 million on human spaceflight and $11 billion on Earth science. Now, if you put that on a chart, the science community is going to kill me, because that was the fear when I became the NASA administrator, was that I was going to put $498 billion on human spaceflight, and I was going to put some measly amount into science. I have tried not to do that. I have tried to focus this agency on all the things that's important for us to do. So I think the balance overall is good. $498 billion for human spaceflight, $11 billion for Earth science. I think that's a fair allocation of funds on the part of this administration and this agency. And it's unfortunate that everyone doesn't recognize the fact that we've done that. That's significant.
Mr. Chairman, more than generous.
Human spaceflight dwarfs
Senator
what
Nelson.
we're spending in other areas.
Senator Gardner, every now and then we have to put on the green eye shades and get into the budget. The President's proposed budget, which you can disagree with, is a 10% increase in earth science. It's from 1.773 billion. It's 175 million increase. That's about 10%. Now, if you want to solve the problem of what you're talking about going to Mars and ramping it up, then what we need is more than the President's request of a $500 million increase for NASA. We could pour the juice like we did in the Apollo program, where the nation's space budget was more like 5% of the entire federal budget, instead of the existing NASA budget being less than 1% of the total federal budget. And you will certainly find this senator supporting you in that. What I have tried so hard to do in the past several years, in what little bit of influence I have in this committee, is to keep it bipartisan. The history of this committee was that it should never have even been bipartisan. It was nonpartisan. And that's what NASA was. And yet, in the past couple of years, we got into these flaps over the sequester, and all of the senators on your side before you arrived were voting to cut the NASA budget by $1.5 billion from the then president's request in 2015, which would have absolutely eviscerated this little agency. Thank goodness we are to the point now that we're talking about this core mission and trying to explore the heavens and realizing that space flight is not cheap. I would also point out to my colleague from Texas that he and I are from Gulf states. And on June the 1st, hurricane season starts. And we are so dependent upon the protection from those natural disasters that plague the shores of our respective states, by being able to have the advance warning by virtue of the accurate predictions of the weather satellites. And as the administrator says, NASA builds them and then turns them over to NOAA. And then coming up, here we've got the Global Participation Measurement, GPM. These are current Earth science missions. What does it do? It predicts extreme weather events. The ISS Rapid Scats, it gives weather forecasting and storm tracking. And then I'll just give you one more. We talked about soil moisture active passing, that SMAP that the administrator already talked about, weather forecasting. All of these things, if you would look behind what appears to be on the surface and get in, and where you have a disagreement, I want to hear about it. But I don't think, and I certainly don't think the chairman of the subcommittee has a disagreement with trying to get accurate weather forecasting on what.
And if you listen to my comments, I'm not talking about that either. I'm just talking about, are we focusing on the heavens in NASA, or are we focusing on dirt in Texas? And so that's what I want to talk about. And I think that's the point of this discussion. And I think it's talking about how we can make sure that we're allowing NOAA to do the work that it's doing in weather, and allowing NASA to look at Mars, and allowing our agencies to work together to predict weather. Certainly Colorado has had its fair share of terrible and tragic weather events, and that's something that we have to fund, and we will continue to do that. I'm just trying to figure out where the proper role and for where that proper mission lies in government. But I'll remind, too, that the sequester was a bipartisan accomplishment. Whether or not we like it and want to change it, it was bipartisan.
Well, fortunately, the sequester, thanks to Senator Shelby, did not happen on NASA, or else we would be way behind and we wouldn't be talking about launching Americans on American rockets in 2017. And by the way, I'm still hopeful that's going to be 2016. The two companies that are competing, Boeing and SpaceX, still think they can make 2016 for the first American riding the rocket. I am not applying. Mr. Chairman, I want to get down in the weeds and ask the administrator a technical question. Mr. Administrator, we're thinking on the SLS that we're going to have the upper stage as a Delta IV. And yet, because of this senator and others, such as Senator McCain and I were the authors in the defense authorization bill saying America's got to start changing its rocket engines from the Russian rocket engines, the RD-180. And notably, the SLS will use the Delta IV upper stage as a stopgap until an upper stage suitable for deep space missions can be developed. So, are we spending wise money human rating the Delta IV as an interim upper stage when later on we might be shifting to another upper stage that we're going to develop? I know that's a question down in the weeds, but we need to look at that.
Yes, sir. Senator, we are looking at what we call the exploration upper stage, and it is our intent that as we go along, as I talked about, we're looking at the total program. We would prefer to have the exploration upper stage be the vehicle of choice, if you will, and just have to certify that vehicle. But again, because we're looking at the funding available for EM1 for the very first flight of the integrated system, we're going to fly with what we call the intermediate exploration upper stage, which is the Delta IV upper stage. But eventually we will work our way to a single exploration upper stage.
And as you all develop your out-year budgets, do you anticipate that ULA's plans to phase out the Delta IV in 2018 is going to affect the cost and the risk of the SLS program?
Senator, I'm not aware of ULA's decision in that regard, to be quite honest. What I am aware of is the fact that we, along with the Department of Defense, are looking for a way to get the U.S. Off reliance on engines and launch vehicles that depend on engines from other nations. But I don't have any information that talks about when or if ULA is going to phase out the Delta IV. I'm sorry.
And that's why I bring it up, because of what we put in the defense budget about the RD-180 and developing a follow-on engine to the RD-180, which is the main engine in the Atlas V. I would hope that there is opportunity for NASA to work with DoD on a propulsion system that benefits both defense and civil space, particularly with regard to the SLS's advanced booster upgrade.
Sir. Senator, we work with DoD continually. There is an organization that's headquartered in Marshall Space Flight Center called the National, I knew I shouldn't have said this, it's NERPS. And I will take it for the record to to get someone to tell us what NERP stands for, but it's an interagency propulsion study group, and much of our work emanates right there where we're talking with the DoD and NASA and others about what the nation needs. What the nation needs is a new launch system, and my caution would be don't focus on the engine, because engines on rockets don't work like people think. You don't go get a new engine and stick it on a rocket. You have to have an integrated system. And so I think what what the Air Force Secretary has said, Secretary James has probably said, if I remember correctly, is that what they're looking at is a new launch system for this nation, which would include a new American-made rocket, to go with the American-made body. But launch systems are integrated systems. And as a matter of fact, when you talked about human rating the upper stage, it's not the upper stage that we human rate, it's the launch system that includes the upper stage. So we human rate SLS, Orion, and the upper stage as a acceptable human rated launch system. So, and if we change any component, we've got to go back in and re-rate it. So my only caution there is don't get hung up on the engine, but focus on the integrated system, because that's what the nation needs.
Administrator Bolden, in your exchange with Senator Gardner, you told this committee that NASA in your tenure had spent $498 billion on human space flight. Now, politicians are famously bad at math, but I just did some quick back-of-the-envelope analysis, and NASA's budget's about $18 billion. You've been administrator 7 years. That's $126 billion. So I assume you must have misspoken, because that's over 300% the total budget of NASA for your tenure.
That's what I said. I am now told by my staff that I was right when I gave you the first number, which was $49 billion. So I misspoke. You're right.
I assumed it must have been. I just wanted to
right.
clarify the record for the hearing.
You're absolutely right.
That $498 billion, the math was not adding up if that number.
I'm a pilot, a Marine pilot, and
look,
that's not to, I should have known that.
Look, sadly, Congress for some time has demonstrated an inability to distinguish between millions and billions. So you are in good company here. I want to note, you have spent a great deal of time at this hearing defending the importance of earth sciences, defending the importance of weather observation. I think everyone would agree with that. There's no one at this hearing that disagrees that we need to observe what's happening with our weather, that we need to know more and have weather satellites. I would note, though, that Senator Gardner's questions, I think, were quite accurate. NASA's core competence is not Texas soil conservation. Now, I'm a Texan. I love our Texas soil. But there are a lot of people studying Texas soil. We've got a whole U.S. Department of Agriculture that spends a lot of time and energy studying the soil in Texas and everywhere else. That ain't what makes NASA special. And I have to say, if NASA ever becomes the place to study Texas soil, you're going to lose a whole lot of bright new engineers who want to go explore the galaxy. To my mind, that exchange underscored the central point I made at the outset of this hearing. It's not that earth sciences are not valuable, but in the last 6 years, there has been a disproportionate increase. We've seen earth sciences increase 41%, and we've seen exploration and space operations, what should be the core mission, what NASA exists to do, decrease 7.6%. That, in my view, is disproportionate, and it is not consistent with the reason so many talented young scientists have joined NASA. And so it's my hope that this committee will work in a bipartisan manner to help refocus those priorities where they should be, to get back to the hard sciences, to get back to space, to focus on what makes NASA special. I am hopeful that this subcommittee will move forward with a NASA reauthorization, and that in that process we will continue this discussion of getting back to the core priorities of NASA. With that, I'll recognize Senator Peters for an additional round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I certainly follow on with that. It certainly is your core mission is to go into space, but also aeronautics. And as I mentioned in my opening comments, we have to look at your portfolio as very broad. And you provide the tools to study deep space. You provide the tools to study earth science. So if you're looking at others studying the soil of Texas or the soil in Michigan with Michigan State University, it is NASA that provides those scientists with the tools that they need in order to do that because of your expertise of going into space. But I want to take this last question to talk about another one of your core missions, which is aeronautics, which is also closer to the Earth, but it has been part of your history, as I mentioned in my opening comments. You came out of, NASA came out of an organization that was involved in aeronautics and advancing commercial flight here on Earth. And if you look at commercial applications for your technologies, there's probably no bigger bang to the taxpayers when it comes to your work in aeronautics, and I appreciated in your opening comments talking about aeronautics and the substantial contributions NASA makes to that industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry here for the United States, and we want to continue to be the preeminent aeronautics country in the world. At least that's certainly my desire and hope others on the committee as well. And so I want to refer back to the National Academy's report that I referenced earlier from 2012, which expressed concern at NASA's lack of a dedicated flagship research aircraft. And the committee noted that existing flight assets can achieve a sustained supersonic flight or low-boom design goals or demonstrate the system-level capabilities of a highly fuel-efficient, low-noise aircraft. And so, Administrator Bolden, given the incredible importance of the aviation industry to the United States economy and the increasing investments being made by our international competitors, who are indeed investing very heavily in this type of innovation, what does NASA need to keep America competitive in aeronautics, particularly with regard to low-boom supersonic transport, which is likely to be the future for flight across the globe?
Senator, if I can take an opportunity to kind of speak to both the comments that you and the chairman have made, particularly about what is our core mission and how we inspire people. I'm really proud to have Dr. David Newman, as Senator Nelson mentioned earlier, here to hear most of this as the nominee to be the deputy. One of these days, you all, hopefully, if this committee sees to support her, you will have someone who can come before the committee and speak with very much authority about what the next generation is interested in and what they need. And I would advise that there is also and I should not do this probably, but there is a supporting member sitting on the back row up there who is one of Dr. Newman's former students who can speak to her qualifications. When we go out and talk to students, as we both do quite a bit, in areas of aeronautics, in areas of space science and earth science, young men and women want to know that they will have a place to go. And they choose majors in colleges and universities based on what this nation has said its priorities are. We are worried about young men and women not wanting to go into the field of aeronautics because they don't see us doing what other nations in the world are doing. So your point about focusing on aeronautics is critical. We hope that we will see some young men and women decide that they want to get into the field of optics, because that is a dying field in the United States, but that is one of the fields that supplies NASA's ability to be the core provider for Earth imaging satellites, for Earth sensors, and the like. And going back to Senator Cruz's comment, we do not do Texas soil conservation. We provide instruments that provide data to the plethora of people who do Texas soil conservation. So I did not mean to mislead you, Senator, in thinking that NASA, we don't do any of that. We teach people how to use the instruments that we create. We teach them how to use the data. You know, I have scientists who travel around the world and help people learn how to create drought and flood models, for example, from the data that comes from NASA-provided satellites. We are not the decision makers. We are not the people who decide what's good for one area or another. So I probably misled the committee if I gave you all the impression that was what NASA Earth Science does. NASA Earth Science, like NASA Heliophysics, NASA Aeronautics and everything, going back to Senator Peters' question, through our low boom testing out at the Armstrong Flight Research Center over the last few years, we have given the FAA and industry optimism that we can in fact solve the problem of sonic booms that today create havoc for people on the ground, break windows, do all kinds of stuff. And we believe that we are on the verge of developing technology, vehicle design, if you will, that will limit the impact of a sonic boom on Earth. It will help to deflect it elsewhere. And that's the whole concept behind low boom, our low boom studies. Due to the work that we did with the U.S. Air Force, the U.S. Department of Defense, the Air Force Research Laboratory on inadvertent impact of the ground, which is one of the things that kills a large number of military pilots. We worked on an automated system that is now credited with a save of an Air Force F-16 in Syria. It uses an automated system to recognize that where the pilot is going, the trajectory is not good. It's going to take them into a mountain or somewhere into the ground, and they're going to suffer another loss due to inadvertent impact with terrain. That's the kind of work that we do, and that's vital. And so we need to have sufficient funding for aeronautics if we're going to continue to do that kind of work. And that's the point. I'm not asking for NASA's budget to get back up to 4% of the federal budget. That would be irresponsible on my part. But I am asking that we support the President's budget as my team has laid out and recommended to the President and to this Congress, because we think it's the most balanced way to bring this nation what we need to so that we maintain our leadership in space, science, exploration, technology, and everything. We are the world's leader. But boy, there are people nipping at our heels. And so if I'm not allowed to balance our spending the way that we have done right now, we could very easily fall behind in some critical areas. And there is no, I really get concerned when we focus on an individual piece. We focus like a laser on an individual part of a budget in an agency that is multi-missioned. You know, you would change the agency if we stopped doing what we have done for more than 50 years today.
Thank you very much, Administrator Bolden. Thank you for being here this morning. I think this hearing has been helpful. The hearing record will remain open for 2 weeks. During that time, senators are asked to submit any questions for the record. Upon receipt, Mr. Bolden, I would ask you to submit your written answers to the committee as soon as possible if there are any additional questions. And I want to thank you for being here this morning. And with that, the hearing is now adjourned. The first priority for the space component of this subcommittee is to work to refocus NASA's energies on its core priority of exploring space. I know that is a passion of the professionals at this fine institution. I see good signs that the current goals set out for human exploration are being achieved, as witnessed in December with the incredibly successful launch of the Orion EFT-1, and yesterday at Orbital's solid rocker motor test in Utah, the engine that will power the Space Launch System into deep space. But we need to use that momentum and get back to the hard sciences, to manned space exploration, and to the innovation that has been integral to the mission of NASA. We also need to provide the men and women that work at NASA with a clear and consistent long-term mission objectives so that they do not find themselves continually pouring time and energy into projects only to see them swept up and carried away by the ever-changing winds of politics. Science needs to drive NASA's mission rather than the political winds of Washington. Short-changing these projects will surely have an adverse impact on encouraging our nation's best and brightest to continue to want to work with NASA. As the chairman of this subcommittee, I'm looking forward to being an outspoken champion not only for NASA and not only for the Johnson Space Center, but for everyone within the NASA family who plays a key role in advancing human exploration and promoting the hard sciences. As former NASA astronaut Dr. Mike Massimino mentioned at our last hearing, young Americans are interested in space-related STEM careers and see themselves as future space entrepreneurs. It's critical that we begin to refocus the core priorities of NASA so that greater and exciting new opportunities can emerge and be realized. It is time for man once again to leave the safety of the harbor and to further explore the deep, uncharted waters of deep space. Now recognize the ranking member, Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's wonderful to serve with you on this committee, and I look forward to working with you in the years ahead. You know, this month we celebrate the 100th anniversary of the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, or NACA. Congress created NACA in 1915 because even though the Wright brothers had invented power flight in the U.S. in 1903, by the beginning of World War I, the U.S. lagged behind Europe in aviation technology. Within decades of NACA's creation, the U.S. was leading the world in aviation once again. We put the P-51 Mustang in the sky, a fighter that proved so critical to the success of the Allies against Hitler. And later, in 1947, we were the envy of the world.
To order. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We gather here this morning not simply to examine the President's budget request, but to begin to lay out a vision for the future of NASA and human exploration. As we begin the process of putting together a roadmap for the future of NASA, there's one vital question that this committee should examine. Should NASA focus primarily inwards or outwards beyond lower Earth orbit? Since the end of the last administration, we have seen a disproportionate increase in the amount of federal funds that have been allocated to the Earth Science Program at the expense of and in comparison to exploration and space operations, planetary science, heliophysics, and astrophysics, which I believe are all rooted in exploration and should be central to the core mission of NASA. As I observed at our last hearing,
It is simply impossible to imagine the world devoid of scientific understanding that NASA has enabled us to achieve. Because of NASA, we know our planet is a fragile oasis in an unimaginably vast space. We know every point in the universe is speeding away from us at an accelerating pace, driven by some unforeseen force called dark energy. We know our galaxy is filled with billions and billions of planets, many of them possibly very much like our Earth. And we have seen actions and evidence of black holes whose mind-bending physics remind us of how much we have to learn about the fundamental nature of space and time. I see NASA's budget as a strategic portfolio of investments aimed at improving the well-being of our country and of our civilization. Like any portfolio, we must carefully choose our investments and remember that the balance of the overall portfolio is of the utmost importance. We must avoid false choices between robotic exploration, human exploration, the study of the universe, or the study of our home planet. We must avoid the temptation to view NASA's mission as a set of competing priorities. Rather, we should seek a set of complementary initiatives that will pay returns to our civilization for centuries to come. I want to thank you, Administrator Bolden, for your service to our country and your appearance before the subcommittee today. And I want to thank you, Chairman Cruz, for holding this hearing, and for Ranking Member Nelson for everything you have done and continue to do for our space program and for the example that you set for this committee. Although my position on this committee is new, my passion for science and technology is not. And I am truly excited about my opportunity to serve as ranking member for the world when Chuck Yeager's X-1 rocket plane broke the sound barrier. But when the Soviet Union placed the first artificial satellite in orbit around the Earth, the U.S. was once again behind. Congress responded this time by folding the efforts of NACA into the newly established National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, in 1958. By 1969, NASA put astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the moon. And in the decades following, NASA sent probes to explore the worlds of our solar system, built telescopes in space to peer to the edges of the universe, built a research outpost in space permanently tended by a crew of international astronauts, and made it possible to study the planet that we call home from space. Over the past century, the investments we have made in our civil aeronautics and space programs look pretty modest compared to the returns. Safe and reliable commercial air transportation, communication satellites, space-based imagery, and spin-off technologies from human spaceflight have provided our country extraordinary economic benefits. The Apollo and Space Shuttle programs inspired generations of American students to pursue education in math, science, and engineering, many of whom went on to lead a revolution in computing and information technology. Just a few years back, I visited a high school in my home state of Michigan, and I witnessed firsthand NASA's continued ability to inspire. All of the students were gathered in the gym to watch a large projector screen that connected them directly to U.S. astronauts on the International Space Station. And when the astronauts asked if any of the students planned to pursue degrees in the STEM fields, hundreds of hands shot up across the auditorium. Today,